and Mr. Luke Trotz for supporting all aspects of this week's activities. Thanks also to the faculty, staff, and students who made this week such a memorable time for everyone, with an extra special shout out to my colleagues in the Shields School of Business for supporting Backlash 2019. Dr. Michael Uslan is one of the godfathers of the modern Hollywood blockbuster. In 1989, Dr. Uslan changed film history by bringing Tim Burton's big screen adaptation of Batman to reality. Never before had a character from an American popular culture been converted into such a lucrative and recognizable property. As executive producer for this film and every subsequent big screen adaptation of the character, Dr. Uslan's efforts turned a $35 million budget into a $411.3 million global box office gross. Since 1989, Batman-related films have grossed over $1.2 trillion worldwide. That's trillion with a T. Dr. Uslan's push for a serious approach to comic book films would ultimately lay the groundwork for the past 3 decades of big-budget action movies. One can see his influence in Hollywood's 2018 earnings. 7 of the top 15 highest-grossing films were based on comic book properties. Much of the media promotional machine that powers these franchises, including merchandising tie-ins, viral marketing, and cross-platform promotion, can be tied back to Dr. Uslan's work on the 1989 Batman film. This film is a key example of pre-internet viral marketing. For months leading up to the June 1989 release, merchandise sales, including everything from action figures to breakfast cereals, produced $750 million in revenues. Despite the nature of superhero films as a staple in our modern popular culture, Dr. Uslan struggled for the better part of a decade to get the 1989 film into the theaters. He acquired the rights in 1979, and despite his initial optimism, no studio would take his idea for a grim and gritty take on the Cape Crusader seriously. This long road from idea to completion is detailed in Dr. Uslan's 2011 memoir, The Boy Who Loved Batman. In addition to his film credentials, Dr. Uslan is the first recipient of Doctor of Comic Books from Monmouth University, holds a JD from Indiana University Law School, an MS in Urban Education from Indiana School of Education, and a BA in History from Indiana University. He has also won an Emmy for his work in the animated series, Where on Earth is Carmen Sandiego? And before we get to meet Dr. Uslan in person, we're going to start off with a showing of the 1989 trailer for the film that started it all.
Every punk in this town is scared stiff. They say we can't be killed. They say we drink smart. Is there a 6-foot bat in Gotham City?
Vicky Vale.
He's clean.
And what do you do for a living?
He's a tired old man. Can't run this city without me. Your luck is about to change. Freak terrorizes. Wait till they get a load of me. He's out there right now. And I've got to go to work.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome Dr. Michael Uslan.
So he comes out of nowhere, saves Hughes, and Bomb the lead. He just disappears.
Yeah,
So the dude's on our side.
I think so.
This whole thing.
I thought we mothballed this after reunification.
That was not Batman's tech. Hi. What a day. I had a chance to take a look at the carnival. I had a chance to speak with some students in different classes. I'm really happy to be here with you guys. I'm happy to see so many Batman shirts all around. And hi. How are you guys? Hi. Batgirl, you look wonderful. That's like the best Batgirl costume I've ever seen. That's great. So, folks, what do you do when you discover your passion? What do you do when you are burning with a passion that literally you can feel coursing through your veins? For me, it was always crystal clear. You're looking at one of the world's early comic book geeks, and I wear that like a red badge of courage. You're looking at somebody who learned how to read before I was 4 years old, according to my mom, from comic books. You're looking at an formerly known as an 18-year-old high school senior who had over 30,000 comic books by the time I turned 18. And my poor dad never once was able to get his car in the garage in our new house. You're looking at a guy, the ultimate comic book geek, who went to the very first Comic-Con ever held on the planet Earth. There were 200 of us, not 200,000 like today. 200 of us showed up at the first Comic-Con, 197 boys and 3 girls. And there was a problem, obviously, because they said, well, what are we going to do with 197 guys and 3 girls? And the people who put the Comic-Con together said, why don't we just tell everyone on Saturday night to come dressed up as their favorite superhero, and we'll give out prizes. That was the night cosplay was born. And I was there in a costume my mom helped me make. So you want to talk geeky? You're talking to the right guy. Back in the good old days, comic books and reading and collecting comic books, if you were over the age of 12, was very subversive. People looked down their nose at you as if you were some sort of mental midget, some sort of person who needed dire help. But it also meant, as a 16 and 17-year-old boy, I was doing something that the girls thought was not cool. So I was what we call date challenged at that moment in time. And boy, have things come around, and are things so different now. It's amazing. And I like to think our 1989 Batman movie was what kicked everything off. So what happens when you're burning with a passion? My passion was comic books, superheroes, very specifically Batman. I fell in love with this character when I was 8 years old. How could you not? After all, unlike most of the other superheroes, this was a guy who had no superpowers. And I contend to this very day, Batman's greatest superpower is his humanity. And in my heart of hearts, when I was 8 years old, I really did truly believe that if I studied hard, if I worked out really hard, and if my dad bought me a cool car, I could be this guy. We're all able to identify with Batman in so many different ways. But my chance to take my passion and turn it into my work and turn it into my life's journey would not begin until I went to college in the early 1970s, Indiana University. Now, back in the early 1970s, it was a time of great experimentation on college campuses, and I need not say anything more about that. But in reaction to those times, the College of Arts and Sciences started what they called an experimental curriculum department. The concept was simple. If you, even as an undergrad, had an idea for a college course that had never been taught before and could get the backing of a department on campus, you then had the right to appear before a panel of deans and professors and pitch the course. If the dean okayed it, even as an undergrad, you could teach it on campus for 3 hours of credit. I said, well, okay, comic books are a legitimate American art form. They're as indigenous to this country as jazz. Comic book superheroes are our modern day mythology. It's all contemporary folklore. My theory being, the ancient gods of Greece, Rome, and Egypt all still exist today, except they wear spandex and capes. And I went to the head of the folklore department at IU, pleaded my case, and I said, look, here's my theory. The Greeks called him Hermes, the Romans called him Mercury, I call him the Flash. The Greeks called him Poseidon, the Romans called him Neptune, I call him Aquaman. And the head of the folklore department said, Michael, you're absolutely right. These are still the same classic tales, inspiring people, giving hope to people. And he said it doesn't really matter if they're called Beowulf, Ulysses, or Superman. If they're called King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table or the Avengers, it's all still the same thing. Brave warriors fighting the demons and dragons of the day. I'll back you. And so, armed with a handful of Superman and Batman comic books, my hair down to my shoulders, my Spider-Man t-shirt intact, I walked into this room. And it was a dark mahogany room with a big conference room table in the center. There were professors around the sides and a dean at the end. And if you've ever seen an elderly person who has that pair of half glasses that they wear down on their nose, he was looking down at me over his glasses and said, so you're the fellow who wants to teach a course on funny books at my university? And I knew I was in deep trouble. I immediately begin to do the first pitch of my career. And I'm pitching my heart out, and he lets me speak for about 2, maybe 3 minutes, and then cuts me off. He said, Mr. Uslan, come on, stop. He goes, I read comic books when I was a little kid. I read every issue of Superman I could ever get my hands on. But all comic books are cheap entertainment for little children, nothing more, nothing less, and I reject your theory. Now, at that moment in time, it was a life-changing minute for me, because I could have just bowed my head, picked up my funny books, turned around, and walked out of the room. But instead, believing I have absolutely nothing to lose, I stood my ground, and I said to the dean, may I ask you 2 questions? He said, you can ask me anything you want. I said, Dean, are you familiar with the story of Moses? And he looked at me and goes, yeah, why? I said, very briefly, Dean, just briefly, could you just summarize the story of Moses for me? And he folded his arms and he sat back in his chair and said, Mr. Uslan, I don't know what game you're playing here, but I'll play this with you. And he said, the Hebrew people were being persecuted. Their firstborn were being slain. A Hebrew couple placed their infant son in a little wicker basket and sent him down the River Nile. There he's discovered by an Egyptian couple who raised him as their own son. When he grew up and learned of his true heritage, he became a great hero to his people by saying, stop, great, thank you so much, I really appreciate it. You said before that you read Superman comics when you were a kid. By any chance, do you remember the origin of Superman? He said, of course, the planet Krypton was about to blow up. Scientist and his wife placed their infant son in a little rocket ship, sent him to Earth. There he's discovered by the Kents, who raise him as their own son. When he grows up, and then he stops, stares at me for what I swear to you was an eternity, and says, your course is accredited. And I was now the first college professor of comic books. I couldn't believe I had just pulled this off. And I'm walking back to my apartment off campus, and clearly inside my head, I can hear my mom's voice, the same voice I had heard over and over again. Michael, you can have the greatest creative ideas in the world, but if you don't market them, and if you don't market yourself, no one will know about it. What am I going to do? I'm a junior in college at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Well, once again, figuring I have absolutely nothing to lose, I picked up a telephone and I called United Press International, which back then was as big a news syndicate as the Associated Press is today. I asked to speak to a reporter. This poor man got on the phone and I began to scream at him. What's wrong with you? You're not doing your job. You're supposed to be the watchdogs of our society. He said, calm down, sir. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, what am I talking about? Are you kidding me? I said, I just heard that Indiana University has a course on comic books. Are you telling me as a taxpayer in this state, they're using my money to teach our children comic books? This is outrageous. This has got to be some sort of communist plot to subvert the youth of America. And I hung up the phone. It took this guy 3 days to find out, did IU really have a course like this? And if so, who was the lunatic teaching it? He comes down with a photographer, interviews me. This interview goes out, it's a third of a page long. It gets picked up by virtually every newspaper in North America, a whole bunch in Europe. My phone starts ringing and never ever stops. I did not have one class that I taught in my comic book course that wasn't filled with reporters, that wasn't filled with television cameras. The CBS Evening News, the NBC Nightly News, everybody was coming down, everybody was interested. And about 2 weeks ago, I was invited on radio talk shows. I was invited on television talk shows. And 2 weeks go by, my phone rings. It is an exuberant male voice that went something like this. Hi, is this Mike Uslan? I said, yeah. He goes, hiya, Mike. This is Stan Lee from Marvel Comics in New York City. I call this my burning bush moment. I was talking to my God. For those of you who are uninitiated, Stan was the co-creator of the entire pantheon of Marvel superheroes. And he said to me, Mike, everywhere I turn, I'm reading about you in newspapers, I'm watching you on television. What you're doing is great for the whole comic book industry. How can I help you? And that began my relationship with Stan Lee as my mentor, as my friend, as someone I was privileged enough to work creatively with. And I'm proud to add that my son and I were two of the producers of his memorial last February in Hollywood at Grauman's Chinese Theater. Two hours later, the phone rings. It's another voice. Mr. Uslan, my name is Saul Harrison. I'm Vice President of DC Comics in New York City. We publish Wonder Woman, Superman. I said, yeah, and Batman, I know. He said, we've been listening to you on the radio. We've been reading about you in magazines. We think you are a very innovative young man and would like to fly you to New York City so we can discuss ways we might be able to work together. Geek dream come true. I'm now in New York City. They offer me a job. I'll work summers in New York for them, and then they're gonna pay me. They're gonna put me on retainer when I go back to school in Indiana. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. So, start working in DC. I'm there about maybe a week or two. It's about 6 o'clock, end of the day. I start to hear yelling and screaming coming from one of the editor's offices down the hall. It sounded just like that. Like somebody was being murdered. And so I ran down the hall, and it was the editor of a comic book called The Shadow. Now, some of you might remember about 20 some odd years ago, Alec Baldwin did a movie of The Shadow. Very famous radio show, Pulp magazine. The Shadow was the primary influence on Bill Finger and Bob Kane in the creation of Batman. Very dark, mysterious character. All of his adventures set in the 1930s, 1940s. So I said, Denny, are you all right? He goes, no, I am not all right. I said, what's the matter? He goes, they just informed me that I now, on this new schedule, have a Shadow script due tomorrow. He goes, I don't have a Shadow script. I don't have a Shadow story. I don't even have an idea for a Shadow story. So I said, well, I have an idea for a Shadow story. He said, you do? I didn't. But so what? It was that moment in time when the door opened a crack and I just stuck my foot in the door. And he said, all right, come on in. Sit down over here. He goes, what's your shadow story? So I said, well, you're going to love it. It's really good. And the wheels are turning, the wheels are turning. And my girlfriend at the time and I had just got back from a trip to Niagara Falls. So I said, well, picture this. Niagara Falls, back in the 30s and 40s, I've learned that people were going over the falls in barrels, and people were walking across the falls on tight ropes. I said, picture the shadow at night with the searchlights going, battling a bad guy on a tightrope over Niagara Falls. And he said, that's a great visual, that's a great cover, but what's the story about? I said, well, I was just getting to that. The story is about smuggling. And he says, well, Michael, what are they smuggling? I said, well, they are smuggling drugs. And he said, well, what's the creative catch? What's special about the story? I said, Denny, I've been saving this for the last because it's the best part. The wheels are turning, the wheels are turning. I go, back then they were going over the falls in barrels. False bottom in the barrel, that's where they're putting the drugs. They go over the Canadian falls, they wash up on the American side, that's how they're getting it through. He said, now that's creative, I like that. Can you have a full script on my desk by 6 p.m. tomorrow night? I said, not a problem. He said, go do it. I'm now a writer for DC Comics. Amazing what can happen when you figure you've got nothing to lose and you're willing to stick your foot in the door. So the next day I turn in the script. 2 weeks go by, I'm walking down the hallway, and who's coming toward me but a guy named Julie Schwartz, arguably the most important comic book editor in history. He is the guy who returned Batman to his dark roots after the TV series went off the air. He's the guy who was directly responsible for the creation of the Justice League of America, Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman. And he was gruff. Julie was gruff. And once you got to know him, he was a marshmallow, but he was gruff. So here comes the kid with the long hair, and he goes, hey, kid. I said, yes, Julie. He says, I read your shadow script. I said, you did? He said, yeah. It didn't stink. I said, oh, thank you. Wow, thanks a lot. He said, how'd you like to take a crack at writing Batman? I still get the chills. I'm an undergrad. I am now writing Batman comics. A dream I had since I was 8 years old. And when that first issue came out, amid all the tears, I panicked. I panicked because it was a dream I had since I was 8 years old, and it's come true. Now, I had no dream. I had no dream. I needed a new dream. And the epiphany took 10 minutes. Because I remembered back to a cold night, January 1966. I was a teenager in New Jersey, and I had been waiting months and months for this moment. This was the premiere of the Batman television series. And it comes on the air, and suddenly I realize, amid the cool animation and the fact that the car was cool, that they were making fun of Batman. That this was a comedy. That the whole world was looking at Batman as if he was a joke. And that, as a Batboy fan, just killed me. And so that night, in our den, downstairs in our house, I made a vow. I made a vow just like young Bruce Wayne once made a vow. Except he made his vow over the bloody bodies of his parents in the street, and my parents were safe in the kitchen. And I said, somehow, someday, I am going to show the world the true Batman. The Batman created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger in 1939 as a creature of the night, stalking severely disturbed criminals amid the shadows. And somehow, some way, I am going to attempt to eliminate from the collective consciousness of the world culture these three new words, pow, zap, and wham. And now I felt it was time. So I went back to the gentleman from DC Comics who had mentored me into the comic book business. And guess what? He had become the president of DC Comics. I said, Saul, I want to buy the rights to Batman and make a dark and serious Batman movie and show the world the true Batman. He was very fatherly toward me, and he panicked. He said, Michael, for God's sake, don't do this. I don't want to see you lose all your money. He said, don't you understand, since the Batman show went off the air, the Batman brand is as dead as a dodo. Nobody's interested in Batman anymore. I said, yeah, but if we do this in a dark and serious way, nobody's ever seen a comic book movie or TV show done like that. This is almost going to be like a new form of entertainment. And he said, Michael, is there any way I can talk you out of this? And I said, no. He said, all right, come on in. And after a 6-month negotiation, on October 3rd, 1979, 40 years ago, 5 days from now, we signed the papers, we had raised the money privately, and I bought the rights to Batman, still a kid in my 20s. How is that possible? Can anyone today in a world of superhero movies and TV shows and video games and merchandise ever imagine that this could possibly happen? But now you know the answer, and it's a very unglamorous answer. I was the only one on the planet Earth to show up. And that's how it happened. So now, wow, I got the rights to Batman. I'm going out to Hollywood now. This is going to be a slam dunk. Everybody, every studio is going to line up at my doorstep. How can they not see the potential here for sequels, for toys, for games, animation? It's going to be a breeze. I get out to Hollywood and I am turned down. I am turned down by every single movie studio in Hollywood. Turned down is a nice expression. I was virtually thrown out of offices as they said this is the worst idea they ever heard. They said, Michael, you're crazy. You can't make serious comic book movies. Nobody's ever done that. Michael, you're nuts. You can't do dark superheroes. That's crazy. Michael, you're out of your mind. Nobody's taken an old TV series and turned it into a movie. Rejection, rejection, rejection. From Columbia Pictures, dear old Columbia, I pitched my heart out. And then I listened as an elderly executive said to me, Michael, come on. Batman will never be successful as a movie because our movie, Annie, didn't do well. And I looked at him, I said, are you talking about that little red-headed girl who sings the song Tomorrow? He said, yeah. I said, well, what does that have to do with Batman? He said, oh, come on, Michael, they're both out of the funny pages. And that was my turn down. We finally came down to the very last studio in Hollywood. This was it for us. And I pitched my heart out, and the guy then sat me down and said, terrible idea, awful idea. But he said, Michael, if you want to do a Batman movie and you're this passionate about it, we'll consider doing a Batman movie with you, but it's got to be the funny, pot-bellied Batman with the pow, zaps, and whams that all the audiences will remember and love. And I said, no. And he sat down in front of me, looked at me and said, son, better to have a movie than have no movie at all. And I said, no. Following that meeting with the last studio, my partner Ben and I were sitting on a bench on the studio lot. Now Ben was my dad's age. Ben was a legend in the movie business. All divisions at MGM in their heyday reported to Ben. He put together, if you haven't heard of these movies or seen these movies, really put them on a list. One was called Dr. Zhivago. One was called Ben-Hur. One was called 2001: A Space Odyssey. Gigi and all their musicals during the 1950s and 60s. And Ben said to me, you know, Michael, it's ironic. that the last no that we got came from you. And then he said, you know what you are? I said, yeah, Ben, I know, I'm an idiot. He says, no, you are Batman's Batman. You are his protector, you are his defender, and this is your vision, so let's keep going, let's figure out how we can put the pieces together and find the right people who will be willing to listen to this vision and make it happen. Let's go. And he picked me right up from one of my darkest moments in this whole process. From the time we bought the rights till we were finally able to get the first dark and serious Batman movie out, took us 10 years. 10 years. I want you to pause for 1 second. I want you to think now. Think of who you were or where you were 10 years ago. Maybe that gives you an idea how long 10 years actually is. I didn't know where my next dollar would come from. I now had a mortgage. I now had a child that I was responsible for. And no, rejection. And let me tell you something I learned. When everybody gives you rejection, it forces you to look deep inside you. It tests your mettle as a human being. And you have to ask, I had to ask, okay, is everybody right and I'm just being stubborn? Or do I truly believe in this? And do I truly believe in myself? And I kept coming up with the latter answer. So the question then is, how do you hang on by your fingertips year after year, after year after year, to try to see your dream come true? How silly of me. I thought I would do this Hollywood thing and it would be a war. And I would go out and battle, and go out and battle, and go out and battle. And it's not that way at all. It's a siege. It's a siege. You've got to dig a foxhole and hunker down in it and put a helmet on. And the most important decision you can make is, who do you allow inside that foxhole to watch your back? You know, can you make your dreams come true? I've proven you can. Is it easy? No. Is it quick? No. But it keeps coming back to what I talked about right at the beginning. Your passion. Your passion. You guys are all so lucky to be in college right now, because you have all this great thing called time to pursue different interests and find out where your passion may lie. Is everything okay? Are you guys okay? Is there anything we can do to help you out? Okay. So you have the ability to go down different paths and find out what you don't like as well as what you do like. Find out and have a chance to discover your passions in life. And once you do that, you can have the golden opportunity to do what I've done, which is to take what I love in life and turn it into my work. So I wake up on a rainy Monday morning and get to say, I can't wait to get to work. And you have no idea how incredible that is over a lifetime. My dad had it. My father was a stonemason. My dad was an old world craftsman, an artist with the fireplaces and the homes that he built. But he worked 6 days a week, and every morning he woke up before dawn, smile on his face, couldn't wait to get to work. And when you grow up in a household like that, how can you not want that for yourself? It's an amazing, amazing thing. And so, finally, after 10 years, a young genius by the name of Tim Burton waltzes into our lives. And I don't use the word genius easily. Over 43 years of working in Hollywood, I've had the good fortune to work with now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people I consider to be geniuses. And it was Tim Burton who had the big idea, who came up with the answer. How do you successfully make the world's first revolutionary, serious comic book superhero movie without getting unintentional laughs from the audience? And as he said to me on this one memorable day, he said, Michael, if we're going to do this, There's only one way we can do it without getting laughs, and that is that this movie cannot be about Batman. Now, at that moment in time, I froze where I was. I think my heart stopped. And then Tim said, this movie must be about Bruce Wayne. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the big idea, the game changer that changed Hollywood. It's the game changer that changed the world culture and its perception of comic books and superheroes. Think about it. Any of you been to an Iron Man movie? Those should be called Tony Stark. Have you been to the last couple of Spider-Man movies that I love so much? What should they be called? Peter Parker. It's the big idea that's transformed everything. And it was the president of Marvel himself who took me to an extravagant lunch one day in New York with a big bottle of expensive champagne. And when I said, why is this happening? He said, this is our thank you for opening the door for Marvel and for all comic book publishers, for all superheroes. 1989 Batman. There was a corollary to that big idea that Tim had, and he said it's about the importance of world building. He said, if we're going to get audiences to believe, without laughing, a guy they see get dressed up like a bat and go out and fight a guy like the Joker, they are not going to do it unless they first believe in Gotham City. He said Gotham City must be the third most important character in this movie, and we've got to get the audience to suspend its disbelief. Well, we've built 5 square city blocks of Gotham City on the back lot of Pinewood Studios outside of London. 5 square city blocks as designed by the second genius in my life, my dear friend, he's no longer with us, Anton Furst. He designed Gotham City. He designed the Batmobile, the whole look of the picture, which still is influencing every genre movie made today. What an impact he and Tim had on every movie that came after that. And how did he do it? When the script came in, there was only one line describing Gotham City. It said, Gotham City, as if hell has erupted from under the earth. So Anton said to Tim, I don't understand this. What does it mean? So Tim said, I think it means New York City had there never been planning and zoning. And then Anton goes, I get that. Goes out, researches conflicting styles of architecture, comes back with all the plans for Gotham. So now the movie opens up. We break every box office conceivable in that magical summer of 1989, when billboards and posters appeared with a big gold oval and a black bat on it, and the date June 23rd, but no mention whatsoever of the name of the picture. Probably the best marketed movie in history. Yet everyone seemed to know what movie was coming. It was the summer where you couldn't walk 20 steps in Times Square without encountering someone with that Batman shirt, actually, or a Batman hat. Something was happening in the culture. And about 2 weeks into it, I get a call. It was the guy who told me that I was out of my mind to want to do serious Batman, the studio head from 10 years before. And he called me and said, Michael, I'm just calling to congratulate you on the success of Batman. I always said you were a visionary. Epiphany number 3. If you don't believe them when they tell you how bad you are and how horrible your work is, and then don't believe them when they start telling you how wonderful you are and how great all your ideas are, but just believe in your work and in yourself, you do just fine. It would be about another 10 years or so when a genius number 3 came into our lives, a man by the name of Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan came in to restore the darkness and the dignity to Batman on screen. And he came in with the same objective that Tim Burton once had. How do you do it and get an audience to accept it as real and serious? But he was going to come at it 180 degrees differently than Tim did. He was not going to build Gotham City because the times had changed. We are now living in a post 9/11 world. It's no longer black and white, it's very gray. It's not good versus evil anymore, it's order versus chaos. And in the comic books, the Joker, who, when Jack Nicholson did it, was the clown prince of crime, was now a homicidal maniac. So Chris Nolan had a series of huge challenges. Number one, how does he get you to believe that Bruce Wayne could be a real young man today with post-traumatic stress syndrome, going on a Lost Horizon type of journey of self-discovery, only to come back home after his training to put on the armor? He picked Christian Bale and worked with Christian and the writers and was able to convince us that this could be possible in our world today. Second challenge, how does he convince you the Joker could possibly be real? He constructed him as a modern-day terrorist. And with the performance of a lifetime by Heath Ledger, the Joker was very, very real and very, very scary. Challenge 3, how does he make you believe in Gotham City, that it could be a real city? The key, he chose Chicago, not New York, initially. I know Pittsburgh comes into it later. But initially, that choice meant you could suspend your disbelief and believe in Gotham City. Because if you take two iconic buildings out of the skyline of Chicago, most people around the world cannot identify the city. Had he shot in New York, the minute you saw the Empire State Building or Times Square, you would go, it's New York, and break the suspension of disbelief. Then came the big challenge. How does he convince you all this crazy tech is actually real? He hired Morgan Freeman to tell you it was real. I mean, if Morgan Freeman says it's true, by God, it must be true. And that was amazing. The Dark Knight and the Dark Knight trilogy, which I always claim with Batman Begins, was one movie crafted by Chris Nolan in 3 acts. And we've been lucky. We had Lego Batman appear. Geniuses 4 and 5, 2 young men, Chris Miller and Phil Lord. What they did for the field of animation in just raising the bar was absolutely incredible, and proving once again that you can do a lighter version of Batman and laugh with Batman rather than laugh at Batman. Why do I call them geniuses? Because after they did the Lego movie, they went and they just did this incredible movie Into the Spideyverse. And once again, elevated the whole field of animation once again. I am so lucky. I am so lucky to be working in a field where you get to be involved in projects with creative people like this, with people, with filmmakers, and here's the key, who have a knowledge of character, who have an understanding of a character, a love for a character, a passion for a character, and then have a vision. And then you believe they have the ability to execute that vision. That is utterly amazing. It's a wonderful experience to have. So now we are on the precipice, 1 week from tonight, of the opening of a new movie. And I can't wait to get your feedback. Because simply said, and I will not spoil anything for you, except to say one thing. For the 3rd time in history, comic book movies, what are comic book movies, how comic book movies are made is going to be revolutionized again. 3rd time, and each time came due to a Batman or a Batman-related movie. Batman '89, The Dark Knight trilogy, Joker. And I really do look forward to your reaction. So, when I started out, I knew Batman was going to be an important part of my life. I was not aware it was going to be my life's work. I understand that this is my legacy, but it is not my greatest productions. That honor goes to my 2 kids. Because what my wife and I have tried to do is always keep perspective, keep your feet on the ground. Family first, always family first. What's in the best interest of the family, and everything else is secondary to that. So I'm fortunate to have two kids who are both, believe it or not, in this silly business, who not only do I love them, I actually like them as adults. There's a parent in the audience. And they've each given us a granddaughter, which is the center point of all life in the universe. Copernicus had it wrong. Doesn't revolve around the sun, revolves around my two granddaughters. And that's been amazing. So as I look back now, and before we start Q&A, and I hope you've got some real good ones for me, I'm going to end this by telling you something my 8th grade English teacher told me. And believe it or not, I realize now I have turned into my 8th grade English teacher. She was brutal with a red marking pen. She was the one who said, Michael, you've got a creative ability. You are an exceptional young creative writer. You can make a career out of doing creative writing, creative enterprises. But anybody and everyone can have creative ideas. Anybody and everyone can have a script, but it's only the few who are willing to master the craft who will ultimately succeed. So you're not getting out of this 8th grade class without increasing your vocabulary, learning how to spell, learning sentence structure. You are going to learn writing, and you are going to learn discipline as a writer. And there's no more handing in the first thing you write. You're going to learn how to rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And I'm going to be more brutal with you than I am with any other student in this class. Mrs. Friedman, I tracked her down in 1989. She was down in Florida, having a nice time. And I brought her up from Florida for the premiere screening we had in New York of our first Batman movie. And I was fortunate enough to be able to speak for 10 minutes before the movie started. And I said, do any of you believe there are superheroes in real life? I said, well, there are. They're just called great teachers. And I told them the story I just told you. And I asked Mrs. Friedman to stand up. I said, none of us would be here tonight. This would not happen if it wasn't for this great teacher. And she got a standing ovation. And that was like my total childhood geek fantasy come true. So what she gave me was a poem. And it was a poem by Robert Frost. And she said, whenever you have moments in life that you need it, read this. And it will help you to get to the next place in life. It's called The Road Not Taken. And I'm just going to tell you one little verse. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere, ages and ages hence, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I chose the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. The fun part. So we have a microphone, and we will come to you with the microphone, yes? And questions. Special award of thanks to the first one. You're very brave. Oh, we got one right here. I didn't even see you. Hi.
Hi again.
What's your name?
Jenna.
Hi, Jenna.
So I know earlier, I didn't even know this when we were talking, that you worked on National Treasure. I was just curious, how did that happen? Like, how did you get on that project? Because that's actually one of my favorite movies, so when I saw it, I was like, oh my goodness.
Well, thank you for that. Has anybody here seen National Treasure? Whoa, okay. It all started with this ring. And I invite you to come up afterwards and take a look at it. This ring I wear was my grandfather's ring. It's 102 years old. My grandfather came over from Minsk, Russia, an immigrant, and was a stonemason. And he and his brothers wanted to join the Masonic Lodge in Bayonne, New Jersey. They were not allowed in, because they were Jewish. So my grandfather, rather than just accept things as they were, applied to the Grand Masonic Organization, and they gave him a charter to start a new Masonic lodge in Bayonne, of which he was the first president, and this is his ring from 1917. And looking at it, it has the Masonic symbol on it, and the more I looked at it, the more I thought, you know, I've heard so many stories about Masons from my dad, who was a Mason, from my grandfather, his brothers, my dad's brothers. I kind of sound like my cousin Vinny. My father was a mechanic, my uncle was a mechanic. And that got me started researching the whole thing. And I found this incredible book. And so we started a project, and we started it at DreamWorks. Sometime later, the director, John Turtletaub, had an idea to do a treasure hunt picture too, that he started over at Disney. And I had a certain writer who I was working with on mine, and then coincidentally, John had talked to him about writing his project as well. And this writer then said, you know, Michael, he's got some really good ideas in his, but he's missing a third act, and he's missing this and this. Would you guys be open to combining the two projects into one? And after a lot of consternation and a lot of talk, that's what we did, and that's what gave birth to National Treasure. I only was involved in the first one. I had nothing to do with the second one. But that was National Treasure. Thank you for that question. Other questions?
I'm Thomas.
Hi.
What was...
Take your time. I got all night. Take your time.
How do you feel about Stan Lee's passing and co-founder Jack Kirby?
Great question, and I thank you for asking that. So I told you before that I was one of the producers of his memorial. And, oh, he would have loved it. He would have loved it. We had the cast of different Marvel movies there, Marvel TV shows, all the Spideyverse guys. Lawrence Fishburne spoke, Mark Hamill spoke, Kevin Smith, Common, RZA. Anybody Wu-Tang fans anywhere? It was a great all-day affair and went well into the evening. But it started the following way. It started outside Grauman's Chinese Theater, where everyone puts their hands in the cement, and we had the crowds that were spilling onto Hollywood Boulevard. And we set up a dais out there. And I opened up the festivities by saying, there is no way Stan would ever dream of allowing this to proceed if we didn't first and foremost acknowledge all of his co-creators, all the artists who co-created the entire Marvel universe. I then read off a list of every Marvel artist from between 1960 and through the 70s. And I said there were two in particular, without whom there could be no Marvel universe. That was Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. For those of you who aren't as geeky as we are, Jack Kirby was the artist who co-created Fantastic Four, Avengers, X-Men, Thor, Iron Man, and the list goes on and on, Silver Surfer. Steve Ditko co-created Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. And at that time, I invited up to the dais Jack Kirby's grandchildren and Steve Ditko's nieces and nephews to make sure they got the accolades and the credit that they all deserved. And then everyone went in to celebrate. So I think that's the way we do it, and I know that's the way Stan would have wanted it done. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Marcus Mahelchik. Right here.
Where are you?
Right in the front.
Oh, hi.
So the Batman movies over time have gradually gotten darker in tone and aesthetic. And I was wondering now with the upcoming Joker movie with an R rating, I was wondering if there is a line in your opinion as to how far and how dark those movies will get.
There is no line for me. The only line for me goes back to what I said before. Does the filmmaker pass the acid test? Does he or she have that love, knowledge, understanding, and passion for the character? What is the vision, and can that person execute the vision? And then I think you stand back. Look how lucky we were that the management at Warner Brothers in the 90s were willing to turn over the keys to their most lucrative franchise to an independent filmmaker by the name of Chris Nolan, and give him the opportunity to see if he could deliver everything everybody believed he could deliver. That's incredible for a studio to do that. It really, truly is. So that gives me a lot of faith that in the future we can see things like that. Marvel did it with Deadpool. I went in to see that, and it virtually just turned me upside down. I've had different reactions to different Marvel movies, and everybody's friendly. When a Marvel movie does well, that's good for us. When our movie does well, it's good for them. To me, The Avengers is an ultimate popcorn summer movie. I love, as I mentioned probably, I love Doctor Strange, and I love seeing him being brought to the screen. Guardians of the Galaxy, there was something really, really new and different, and I loved what they did with that, breaking down the walls and barriers. But I have to tell you one quick Stan Lee story. Stan and I were having lunch one day, and they had just announced at Disney they were going to make Ant-Man. And Stan, over his matzo ball soup, is going, "Yeah, Michael, I don't get it." He goes, "Out of my whole career creating superheroes, the one character I never was able to make a success of was Ant-Man." He said, "Originally, we did a story about a man who was shrunk in an anthill." He goes, "It didn't sell well, but we got a lot of letters, so I said, all right, let's give him a costume. I'll call him Ant-Man and see if we can make a superhero out of him." We did Ant-Man. It didn't sell. He said, "So I introduced a female partner. We made it Ant-Man and the Wasp. It didn't sell." Then I thought, okay, maybe fans don't like heroes shrinking. Maybe we should have them grow. I turned him into Giant Man. That didn't sell. I tried the new Giant Man. That didn't sell. I changed his name to Goliath. That didn't sell. Then I thought maybe we got the wrong insect. So I changed him from Ant-Man to Yellow Jacket. That didn't sell. He goes, "Now Disney's going to spend $250 million to make a movie. Maybe they'll figure it out." And of course, they did. And I went into the Ant-Man movie expecting to absolutely hate it. And it absolutely stole my heart. So you never know what you're going to get. But as long as there are filmmakers that come in with new visions and are willing to be bold and daring, and the studios are willing to let them be bold and daring and not be beholden to toys, games, and Happy Meals, then the audiences are going to benefit. Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Andy. At first, my parents might have a bone to pick with you, the financial struggle they've had because of 1989 Batman and my 29 years of love of it. So that's what kicked it off for me, so I wanted to thank you first and foremost for creating that and the love I've had of Batman since then. My question though is, as the ultimate Batman geek, can you talk about how over time, in 1989, you changed canon to a degree with Jack Napier killing Bruce's parents and away from Joe Chill, and how that can be less criticized in 1989, whereas today, Batman versus Superman, Batman's killing people, and Twitter exists, and Facebook exists, and everyone wants to criticize it. Can you kind of talk about the process as the ultimate Batman geek of moving away from canon, and how you and other producers deal with that criticism from 1989 and even now?
In 1989, I was really concerned when the director and the writer were going with the Joker killing Batman's parents, Jack. And I went to Bob Kane, the co-creator, who was still around. I said, "Bob, I need to know what you think about this." And he said, "Well, you know, Michael, I actually really like this." He said, if we had created the Joker earlier, he said this would have made perfect sense in the story. The fact that we didn't create the Joker till a year or two, I guess about a year after Batman, precluded us from being able to do anything like this, because I like this. So I said, okay, if you're okay with it, then I'll be okay with it. I just pestered and annoyed everybody. Let's at least have a second guy there, so the few geeks out there like me can say, okay, that's Joe, chill with him. But yeah, that's how that came about, and that's why I came to accept it and feel absolutely fine about it. The Killing Joke graphic novel opened the door for so many of us, and it really is the source for opening the door to other interpretations. When you read that graphic novel, you realize the Joker has come up with various origin stories of himself. And then you learn, well, that one's not true. He was just hallucinating or playing a joke on somebody. Well, that one wasn't true. No, that one wasn't true. Until you get to a point you wonder if any of them were the true story. So I think that specifically The Killing Joke opened the door to filmmakers to come in and play with it the same way they did successfully in the comics. And I like that creative freedom. I think that creative freedom works great, because keep in mind always, when you go to see a movie, you are not seeing Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's Avengers. You are seeing the director's interpretation of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's Avengers. You are not seeing Bob Kane and Bill Finger's Batman. You are seeing Tim Burton's Bob Kane and Bill Finger's Batman. And you have to keep that in mind, that the presence, the identity, the vision of the director plays an important part, bringing it from one medium to another. And I hope that answers your question. Okay, thanks. Next up.
My name is Evans. I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
With your original idea on the Batman being dark, have you ever talked to Frank Miller during his 1986 run on the Batman: The Dark Knight?
Sure. Yes, I talked to him.
Did that influence the film being made in 1989?
No. Tim Burton already had his vision intact. I'll tell you what Dark Knight Returns helped us with. Dark Knight Returns helped the powers that be in the studio system, in the hierarchy of the authority of Hollywood, who were not fanboys from the same era we might have been, but were more from an earlier era in comics where they really still thought of comics as being for 8 to 12-year-old kids. And with the growth of graphic novels and the increase in the sophistication and the maturity of graphic storytelling, which broke open in '86 by both Dark Knight Returns and The Watchmen, it was an eye-opener for them that says, oh, wait a minute, these things can be for more than children. They can be aimed at adults. Adults are now flocking to this new thing called graphic novels. So that was a breakthrough to help us market this and get over any final hurdles that some people at the studio might have had. It was helpful in that regard in particular. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I just had a quick question. Is there anything that you've created that you know, with time you looked back on and be like, I wish I did it this way, or I wish I didn't do that at all?
Oh, sure. All the time. All the time.
Some examples, please.
Well, yeah, any example? Yeah, any example. All right, so the first movie I ever did was a little tiny $1.9 million cult classic called Swamp Thing. Worked with a guy who was one of my great friends in life, one of the most creative and nice people I ever met, named Wes Craven. Wes would go on to do Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, and so many other movies. I had never produced a movie before. And I was told later it should have been $19 million, not $1.9 million. So we set out to do this little rubber-suited 1950s throwback monster movie, Beauty and the Beast thing, where the kids in the audience could clap for the heroes and boo at the villains and go get popcorn when the hero kissed his girl. But we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, in all honesty. And there was no such thing back then as computer effects. Everything had to be done, had to really be done. So I said, all right, this is a breeze. So we went down to Charleston, South Carolina, and we shot in the actual swamps. In the middle, they were infested with alligators everywhere. We had rattlesnakes dropping out of trees, cottonmouths, copperheads, a coral snake. Back then, if you got bitten by a coral snake, goodbye and good luck. Everybody on the crew had to wear alligator boots. And a couple of people were packing guns on the set. And the ranger came in to educate us a little bit. And he was like, do you northern boys know what you're doing down here? And he goes like, what do you do if you see an alligator ahead of you? I said, well, you turn around and walk away. He says, well, up to 200 feet, an alligator can catch a horse. I didn't know that. So our special effects guys and special effects makeup guys did these elaborate Swamp Thing costumes, and the bad mutations all had these costumes. And then they all had to go into the swamp to fight and to do what they do. But what we didn't bother to figure out or even think about was after 200 some odd years of leaves falling into the swamp, that was not exactly water. It actually turned out, when we analyzed it, to be tannic acid. And within 62 seconds of going in there, all the adhesives on all of the special effects makeup disintegrated and just fell apart. So poor Wes, as it came down to it, if we were eating up every spare part that we had, he had 60 seconds to get a take. But yeah, I know, I felt the same way. And so that was really, really tough. I didn't know yet that when you pick a location, you better check out the patterns of the airports nearby. When you find out that every 80 seconds a plane shoots overhead and you have to stop shooting. So all of these crazy things. So we had child actors, we had animal actors, we had special effects, stunts, special effect makeup, and it was insane. So the script is terrific. And I would love someday, in some other eternity, to redo that movie today with computer effects, with what it could really be. I think it would be a real tribute to Wes. But that's just like one example. But it's a doozy. Any other questions? Where are you? I can't see. Oh, there you are. Okay.
First, what's your favorite Batman movie, and who's your second favorite DC superhero?
What's my favorite child, did you ask?
Batman movie.
So let me put it this way. The first Batman movie was a dream come true for me. Okay, so that's in a very special category, and will always be in a very special category. Chris Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. I wasn't kidding before when I said Batman Begins, The Dark Knight Rises. It's not 3 movies, it is 1 movie in 3 acts. I always group them together. I think that was the best live-action Batman movie made to date. Best Batman story ever told in the media, I'm going with the movie they're going to show here tonight, Batman Mask of the Phantasm. I think it holds up beautifully. It brought the world Mark Hamill as the Joker, who to me is like the definitive voice and attitude of the Joker. It brought the world Kevin Conroy as the incredible voice of Batman, and it is just a great story. So I'd like to take a moment on that and just give credit to all of the brilliant people responsible for Batman the Animated Series and the animation since then. If you want to see how Mr. Freeze should be handled in a story where it tugs at your heart, take a look at the Mr. Freeze episodes of the animated series, for example. Bruce Timm, Eric Radomski, Paul Dini, Andrea Romano. These are absolutely brilliant people who have done that. Second part of your question was what? Who is my favorite? Oh, second favorite DC superhero, Spectre. The Spectre is the ghost who walks. He's a detective that's killed and then sent back to solve his own murder, bring his murderer to justice. And then the voice that speaks to him and sent him back says at the end, no, you're not going to rest now. You did such a good job. You're going to walk the earth, and you are going to represent all the people who were cheated out of their lives, and you are going to get all those evil people. And the Spectre is a vengeful dude and goes after them in very vengeful ways. And I always thought that was a very different approach. It was co-created by Jerry Siegel, who was also the co-creator of Superman. Yes?
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, are you talking about Batman animated series and stuff? Okay, they ever had any work or insight, or I guess, okay, so, do you ever contribute in any way to anything related to that, like Batman, Batman Beyond, something like that?
Well, Batman Beyond I love. Batman Beyond, we actually won an Annie Award, which is like the Oscar of animation for Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, which was released in 2 versions, one a much harder edge version.
Oh, yeah.
Taking off my producer hat for a moment, just putting on my fanboy hat, I always wanted to see a live-action Batman Beyond movie. We actually were working many years ago to develop one. Paul Dini actually wrote the script, and I always thought it was the perfect movie for Clint Eastwood to play Bruce Wayne circa age 80. If it was up to my druthers, and now again, don't go on the internet and say, oh, this guy said this or this guy said that. This is just talking fanboy geek stuff. Wouldn't it be cool to imagine Michael Keaton coming back and doing Batman Beyond movie, breaking it Wouldn't it be also cool to see Tim Burton come back and finish a trilogy? That would be something too. But that's just fanboy Michael, that's not producing. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Yeah?
in the back. My name's Adam,
Hi, Adam.
and I'm a fan of video games, so I was wondering if you got the chance to work with the Batman Arkham series or like Injustice video games.
No, but I just rooted them on. For years, I had been campaigning. I'm one of those guys that believes that video games based on movies had never done well, because the studios tended to keep all the gaming people at arm's length for as long as they could in the paranoia that too much material could get out. And there's no point in spending $50 million or whatever when you then have to rush something and you don't have the time to do it and do it properly. And I've always been a fan of, why not just have the best people go out and make the best Batman game possible without being limited in time and without being attached to this project or that project. So I was thrilled when the Arkham Asylum games began. I was doubly thrilled when they turned to my friend Mark Hamill to bring home the voice of the Joker. So I'm a big fan of those. I think they're absolutely terrific. Yes, hi.
Hi, I'm Hannah. So with the new Joker movie coming out, you know, like we get his backstory at least a little bit. How do you feel about Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn, their backstories?
What do I feel about Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn? Well, number one, you're going to have a movie called Birds of Prey coming up very soon. It's already filmed. And that is Harley Quinn, Huntress, Black Canary. I don't want to give away anything if they haven't talked about it yet. All right, don't get me in trouble. Stay off the damn internet, please. I think in this day and age, proven by Wonder Woman and Patty Jenkins, that you can have super successful female-driven superheroes. I am a huge fan of that Wonder Woman movie, huge fan of it. Again, why? Because they concentrate on story and character more than on special effects and action and blowing stuff up. And I think that that's one of the key things. And one of the reasons I think we need more female directors doing comic book movies who are not so much enamored with just showing off the latest special effects. I enjoyed Captain Marvel, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more movies like those, and we're way overdue. Way overdue.
So putting on your fanboy hat again,
Yeah.
do you feel the Fox series Gotham helped or hurt the backstories of not only Bruce Wayne, but also then all of the villains that Bruce faces?
So how about them pirates? You know, they don't have a big payroll. Clint Hurdle, I think, is a really good manager. I hope he stays. The stadium's magnificent. Actually catch their spring training games down in Bradenton. Thank you for that question.
Hello.
Hi.
So, putting back on your producer hat, I love your story of just how far you've come and all the things that, like all the rejection that you've faced and still lived your dream. If you were to give a piece of advice for someone who is, I guess, struggling to chase that passion when it deals with filmmaking specifically, what maybe piece of advice would you give to that person?
I teach 2 courses every year for 3 intensive weeks at my alma mater. One is called The Business of Producing Motion Pictures. The other one is called Live from Hollywood, Experiential Learning. And I'm going to tell you what I tell my students all the time. First thing, run. Flee. Don't do it. Are you a masochist? Why are you going to do that to yourself? You're talking about the most competitive areas in the world that you could do. Go into your family's bakery business. Do anything else. Now, if I can't scare my students out of pursuing this, then they have a decent shot at making it work. But it requires a whole bunch of things, and this is what it requires. Number 1, that burning, aching passion. Number 2, I have lectured in colleges all around North America and all around the world. Doesn't matter if I'm lecturing in China or here, I'm seeing the same things for these last 2 generations. There is a scarily pervasive, very misguided sense of entitlement that I keep running into. I don't know why. Young people who think they can sit back and the world's going to come to them, or that the world owes them something. And unless you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, it's not happening. So what I've learned, and this is my reality, is that at best, 15% of younger people will actually get up off the couch and be proactive to pursue their passions or their dreams, whatever you want to call them. So if you are one of those who are motivated to get up off the couch and be proactive, your competition is now 15%, not 100%, and your chance of success just shot through the roof. That's the key. It's absolutely the key. Number 2, no, you can't do it from Loretto, Pennsylvania. Because you think this is a really big, sprawling, nebulous industry. It's very small as you get into it. And you've got to network. You've got to network. It's so much about who you get to know and who sees you in action. That's why internships are so important. Really important. But you got to be on the premises. It's going to require a commitment. Now, there are different levels of the business. If you really want to be active in it, you go to Los Angeles. That's where the power decisions are made. That's where the agents are, the studios are, the networks are, the talent pool. And you need to be in the mix, and you need to do it. There are parts of the business you can just go to New York and do successfully. On a different level, you can go to Chicago or Indianapolis or Pittsburgh and work locally, and with any productions that come into the state, or working for the TV network affiliates, or other opportunities, PBS, they're limited, and they're on a different level. But it gives you choices. And if there's anything I've learned in this life, it's that life is simply a matter of choices. It's about what you choose to do, what you choose not to do, what you choose to say, what you choose not to say, and there are consequences for every decision like that. And that's, the last advice, which I gave to one of the classes earlier today. 2 things if you want to do this. Number 1, better to be an hour early than 5 minutes late. Number 2, dress the way you want to be perceived. So if you dress like a college student, you're going to be considered a college student and treated that way. If you dress like a professional, you're going to be perceived that way and treated that way. And it's 2 important things. And when you go in for your internship or job interviews, engage, show your passion, show your knowledge base, and don't sit back quietly. They're going to be hiring people they think can make them look good and can be very supportive and fill in a piece of a puzzle for them. And it doesn't mean it has to be Ivy League. It could be anyone. But if you show you're knowledgeable about what's going on in the industry, you're well-read, you're up to date on following the industry, that if you're claimed to be so passionate about it, you better understand its history. Because if in that interview I ask you what your favorite Alfred Hitchcock movie is, and you don't know what I am talking about, and again look like a deer caught in the headlights, it's not going to reflect well. So you got to get through old dudes like me in order to get there. And that's really the best basic advice that I can give you. And should we do 1 more or 2 more? Yeah, okay.
Hi.
Hi.
My question was about the new Joker movie that's going to come out.
About what?
The new Joker movie that's going to come out.
Yeah.
The question was more, what was the creativity, the imagination behind changing the scope from hero to the...
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
So what was the idea, the creativity behind changing the scope between the hero to now focusing on the villain?
The entire vision for this movie belongs to Todd Phillips. He had a definitive vision for what he wanted to do, how he wanted to do it. As I said, it feels like a Martin Scorsese crime drama in a lot of ways. But all the credit and all the accolades belong to Todd, who also co-wrote the script as well. And I hope that answers your question. But he is the guy who deserves all the praise for this. And artistically, it's absolutely incredible. Hi.
So while you were in your undergrad, and you said that you went and you pitched the comic book class during your junior year, right?
Yes.
So I'm sure that while you were still in your undergrad, there was a lot of noise. Not literal, but say your friends like, Mike, why are you doing this, or things like that. My question is, how did you in your undergrad be able to block out all this noise and still be able to follow this passion for as long as you did?
Because it was passion. Because I was 100% convinced of what I was doing. I totally believed in it. And I got flack. There was a far right-wing newspaper columnist of the day who took me on in his column and said some really nasty stuff. Not just, oh, there's a comic book course, what's this world coming to? I mean, that's basically the story I gave the reporter when I called him. It was quite a nasty attack. And so in terms of blocking things out, my response, I found out who syndicated his column. I called and threatened to sue them for libel, and that I would not back off unless they allowed me to publish a complete rebuttal to everything he said and syndicate it to the same newspapers that his column appeared in. And they accepted that as a settlement, and I did that and went out with that. So I was ready to, take on the world. I knew it wasn't going to be simple. I mean, really, teaching comic books in college, I knew what was coming. I was shocked that the media, generally speaking, treated it as, look at this oddity. I mean, I made Ripley's Believe It or Not, okay? My mother was so proud. And they treated it more as, wow, look at this oddity. And when they actually took the time to interview me and saw the sincerity and saw the backup that I had for my claims about art, mythology, literature, folklore, they had some degree of respect for it, that I wasn't just some crazy guy doing something, but there was actually some substance behind it. And that's what it was. And you know what? Just like they said on the old Superman show, it's a never-ending battle. And it really is. But today, look how far we've come. Comic books that were subversive, that were looked down upon by society, that were burned in the mid-50s because they claimed they were the post-World War II cause of the rise of juvenile delinquency in America. They had comic book burnings in St. Louis, in Jersey City, eerily reminiscent of what happened in Nazi Germany in the 30s. And the fact that today, they're date movies, that the general audiences, society in general, embrace them, I almost miss the subversiveness of it all in the good old days, and that it has become so acceptable. But that's what we were able to accomplish. So at the end of the day, I simply say we won. The geeks have inherited the earth.
Well, I think that's the perfect end note. Can we get a massive round of applause for that? We started the movie screening shortly. Thank you so much.
Okay. Oh, okay.